I am incredibly pleased to introduce the fantastic Dr. Mary Lassity. Mary's going to be talking with us about disruptive innovation, the rocky road to Web 3. Mary is a distinguished professor and the David D. Glass Chair of Information Systems and Director of the Blockchain Center of Excellence at the University of Arkansas and co-author of Blockchain Foundations for Web 3. Mary is also a fantastic friend to HFS, and she may or may not have an accent or a tone of voice similar to mine. But with that, I'm delighted to welcome Mary to the stage, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Elena. This is a little clicker. I'm going to go off script for just a moment to comment on some of our morning. So we've been talking about customer experience, we've been talking about automation, and we've been talking about global shared services. And I just want to say the jobs are safe. So I was just trying to do a very simple process of trying to check in on my American Airlines flight operated by British Airways. And I spent half an hour, I couldn't get past the, you need COVID documentation. I'm like, no, we don't. So we finally had from BA.com, please call our help desk number. So I walked out, and I'm sorry I missed about half an hour of a panel. And after pressing in about 17 buttons and finally waiting online for 20 minutes for the call center to answer, they said, I'm sorry, madam, we cannot help you. Please go to BA.com. So I know that eventually it's going to be a wet brain at that Heathrow Airport that will be the only person who can help me. So the jobs are safe. Okay, so I'm very excited to be here today. Okay, there we go. So as Elena mentioned, I'm the director of the Blockchain Center of Excellence, and I'm coming up on year 5. I don't know where the time goes. And we are housed in the Sam M. Walton College of Business. And Sam M. Walton is the CEO and founder of what? Walmart. Okay, good. All right, so we are, Walmart is one of our major sponsors of the center. And the focus of this center, I kind of feel schizophrenic on most of my days because on my research mission, I'm working with very large traditional enterprises. And we're trying to say, how can they, how do you adopt blockchain-enabled digital ecosystems? And they go down one path, and we'll talk about that they're primarily doing very private closed networks. But then the other part of my life is I'm a college professor. And we have full blockchain curriculum at the undergraduate and graduate levels. And my students are taking this Web3 stack in a completely different way. And so they want to go public. They want to bring down the government. They want to get rid of trusted third parties like many of you in this room. So I do feel like I spend much of my days being very schizophrenic. So I have to ask, most of you in here, I'm assuming, are going to be more on our board member side. But do you share the true aspirations of what Web3 is all about? It's really all about disrupting what we have done to the internet with Web 2, where it is dominated by big tech companies, where we've got surveillance capitalism, very little privacy, and an economy that has left almost 1 billion people on the planet unbanked. So the people that had created Web3, the cypherpunks, the libertarians, people like my students, they want this to happen for the future of the internet and the future of transactions and that are digital. They want to fix these inequities. They want freedom, they want privacy, and they want to be able to monetize their own assets. So how many of you will be disrupted by some of the innovations I'm potentially talking about today? Not sure where to point. Okay. So Web3 is really a whole series of a tech stack that you can think about, that we've had some of these now for over 10 years. And you can take them like Lego blocks and combine them, and we are seeing the seeds of disruption today to many businesses. Right? The seeds of disruption for Web3 are based on entirely new economic models that look nothing like the business models you have today. So where we have the Web 2 stack, that's about centralized platforms monetizing user activity to their benefit. And Web 3 is all about, no, we're going to make the economic models about compensating the users and the community. And so you see examples of many tech stacks, and I was going to focus on the metaverse one, because do we really want Mark Zuckerberg creating the next version of the internet on the metaverse, or do we want it to be a more Web 3, more inclusive? But I'm going to focus instead on something that maybe more of you can relate to, because we all use search engines. So this is an example of a Web 3 browser. It's called the Brave browser. Does anyone in here use it? Okay, this is so funny. I was just in Manchester at the British Blockchain Association. I had this slide up. I said, how many of you use it? Every hand in the room went up. So if nothing else, you have something to do when you go home tonight. So I want you to download this web browser. It's free. It's quite a good search engine. But you can set it to be completely privacy enhancing. There are no cookies. It won't track your activities. But if you want to make money, you can download the wallet. You see the picture in the purple is my wallet. And when you click on an ad, you get compensated in the form of a cryptocurrency called a basic attention token. So this wallet shows you that I got 0.01 basic attention tokens for clicking on that link below. Now, it's only worth a penny. So you might think, well, I don't have to, this isn't seeds of disruption, but I'm going to tell you that it is, because it's a new economic model. And don't forget the lessons from history. The typewriter manufacturers laughed the first time they saw a word processor. Like, it looked like junk, right? You're not going to replace it. So that's my message to you today, is you've got to be looking at the startups and the new entrants, because the seeds of disruption are here. They don't have a large market share yet, but these building blocks are available, they're cheap, and the innovations are coming fast. So as a professor, I want to just remind you, if you have an MBA in here, you're very well aware of the late, great Clayton Christensen. And everything I'm seeing in this space resonates with his theory. So he says, companies like here in the room, you don't use any of these technology stacks for disruptive innovation. You use the language of disruption, but disruption is about new business and economic models. Disruption is that Web 3 stack I just showed you. My 5 years working with enterprises, you've got a hard enough time doing sustaining innovations. And sustaining innovations are defined by improving your processes, your products and services for your existing clients using your same business models. So we're going to see, this is also a good slide to say my enterprises have gone down the sustaining innovation space, and my students are all focused on disruption. Okay, so first I'm going to now tell you the story of where enterprises are, even with sustaining innovations with that Web 3 stack. And I think an easy way to think about all of this is think how hard it is for you to implement software within the boundaries of the firm. Go back and think about when you first put in a CRM or an ERP system. Now try to do it at an ecosystem level, right? This is what these technologies are for, ecosystem transactions. And when I started studying this space 7 years ago, there were no enterprise blockchain applications. So all we were doing was studying the consortia that started to evolve, and they've done thousands of proof of concepts, but they just exist in sandboxes. There's very few that ever make it to live production. So Phil, you had done a survey, I want to say a couple years ago, that you showed that fewer than 6% of these POCs ever make it into live production. I think that number holds up today. Okay, so I want to say I got excited in 2018 because the first enterprise blockchains start coming online. And the first one I studied was TradeLens, and that was started by Maersk and IBM to track shipping containers. So now I start writing case studies. Now I got the seeds of a book, and the book's getting bigger and bigger. Ooh, now we got the IBM Food Trust 2018. That was developed by Walmart and IBM to trace food from farm to fork. And the enterprise systems, they keep coming online. I keep writing more case studies. The books, I've written 4 books on this topic. They get bigger and bigger. I'm pretty excited. So these sustaining innovations, they're all sustaining because they're not breaking their business models. They're just software to help with more efficient processing. So this quadrant is filled with sustaining innovations. This quadrant also is based on what we call private permissioned blockchains, meaning they're completely closed off. You have to be invited to participate. And if you're going to operate a validator node in the network, meaning that you get to validate transactions and add it to the shared ledger, you have to have permission to do it. Another thing about all of these is they use very few of those Web3 building blocks. They have a notion of smart contracts. They have a notion of distributed ledgers, but they don't use digital wallets. They don't use cryptocurrencies. And the final comment about this quadrant is economically, as a market, it's quite small. Maybe hundreds of millions, Phil, I don't know how many you would say here, but we'd be measuring it in millions. So here's the missed opportunity. What is going on in the public blockchain space? That is a $1 trillion market, right? Even today, I looked and Bitcoin is going way up as we start to have more uncertainty with our banks in America. It's driving the price of Bitcoin up. So enterprises are missing this opportunity because this is $1 trillion worth of people with digital assets in their wallets. Don't you want to sell to them? Right? So what's it going to take for enterprises to get up there? Okay, so I told you my books were getting bigger and bigger and bigger as all these enterprise adoption stories came on. Last year my book got smaller and smaller and smaller. So one of my case studies was WeTrade, and this was based on initially 7 banks, European banks, and then went up to 12. They created a joint venture based in Ireland, and their blockchain network was all about offering trade financing services to their existing small to mid-sized banking customers. That went under, so one of my darlings went under. Wall Street Journal published an article that, TradeLens, my first exciting case studies, calls it quits. All right. Next, which other one I pull out? One of my very earliest case studies was on the Australian Securities Exchange. They spent $168 million and canceled the project. Okay, 2 of our board members shut down their blockchain-focused services. Now they still have it as part of an enablement for an end-to-end client solution, but it's not branded blockchain. Okay. Oh, now our darling, the IBM Food Trust. Walmart hasn't really expanded its use beyond its initial loose leaf lettuce. Boy, that's hard to say 3 times fast. Loose leaf lettuce. All right, so they haven't really added to it. Okay, one of our consortia, the ones that we held up as a model on how to partner, was B3I on insurance in the insurance industry, shut its doors. So I found myself in a very weird pivot point where instead of studying enterprise adoptions of these technologies, I started doing autopsies. What's wrong? What's happening? And, going back to that comment of how hard it is to implement software within the boundaries of the firm, doing it across boundaries is immensely more difficult. Now, some of these private permission blockchains will endure. And the secret is there a coercion involved? Is there a very powerful trading partner that says, if you want to do business with me, you have to be on this blockchain network? Or a regulator that comes in that says you are forced to trace pharmaceuticals from the manufacturer to the retail store. Those are the only 2 that I think are going to survive, a powerful trading partner or a regulation in that little box of private permission blockchains. Does this mean enterprise blockchains are dead? No, we have to get all of you up into the public block. That is where the $1 trillion market already is. And we have some very innovative board members. And one of them is right here, Paul Brody, who is head of global blockchain for all of EY. Is Sarab in here? I know he knows him. Yes, you know him. And we both thought he was crazy because he's been saying this for 5 years. While everybody was going down the private network, we can't put anything on a public blockchain, Paul kept saying, you're missing the long game here because you don't want these private networks. You're going to have vendor lock-in. You're going to have infrastructure costs. You're going to have interoperability issues. So he's been thinking about what is it going to take to safely and following all rules and regulations, how do we get all of you enterprises up into the public quadrant? Another innovative board member we have is Dale Christie. He is the blockchain strategist for all of Federal Express. He started down the consortia path and said, oh, no, this isn't going to scale. And he completely pivoted to say, we have to figure out a way, how can we safely as enterprises get up into that public blockchain space? And then my favorite person in this space, his name is John Wolpert. He was on the team that created the original code base for those private permission blockchains. All right, so he's the one that started it. All those ones I showed you, most of them are built on something called Fabric. He does nothing but go around and apologize for it. Left the company he worked for, and he said, I got to redesign, I got to fix the mess I made. How do we get to public blockchains? So you need things that are now available. And I don't have time in this limited time to go over all of them, but we now have, built by the way, EY, Microsoft, and John Wolpert, using zero-knowledge proofs, how you can do confidential transactions on a public blockchain. So that's one layer. We can have to invite me back again to go into depth in that. We now have layer 2 solutions on public blockchains where the transaction costs are much lower and the settlement times are much faster. And on the Bitcoin network, that layer 2 default is pretty much the Lightning Network, and on the Ethereum network, it's Polygon. We have lower carbon footprint. All of you worried about ESG couldn't use public blockchains when it was based on proof of work. Ethereum pivoted to a much more viable model in September. And now I get to talk about my passion for the last year is verifiable credentials. Now, Phil, when we were in New York, you had something like 10 hot technologies, and you went down the panel and you said, which one? And most people said AI, or most people say cloud. And when you got to me, verifiable credentials, Phil, and it's not on your list. So since you gave me the center stage tonight, I get to talk about this. Okay, so keep in mind, most transactions are digital, which means we're doing them on the internet. So what do enterprises need? You need to know your customers. You need to know your employees. You need to know your providers. So how do you do the Web3 on public blockchains? You need verifiable credentials. The very first credential of anything that happens online is what I'll call the connection. Right? You have to have a relationship between the company and the customer, or between one company and another company, or from one customer to another. So the very first credential we ever need is the online connection. Now, this is a very old cartoon, but it still holds up. So this was in the New Yorker in 1996. And it says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. But it beautifully captures how the internet was architected, right? TCP/IP has been a standard of the internet since the early 1970s. And all it does is uniquely identify machines that are connected to the internet. You know, every device you have has an IP address. It doesn't tell you anything about the human beings using those machines. So we did the world's worst thing almost 60 years ago, and we created the centralized identity model online. You all know this as accounts and passwords. Nobody likes this. You as users hate it. You probably have over 200 accounts and passwords. You probably have either things that you try to manage it with a key. I mean, they're a disaster. We know that. Also, as a user, you have no sovereignty over it. You think you deleted your Facebook account? You did not. All you've done is deny yourself access to it. It's the centralized platform that has the CRUD rights, the create, read, update, or delete rights. So it's a terrible model from us as users. It's also a terrible model for the centralized platform because this is where you're spending all of your cybersecurity dollars. It's a honeypot for cyber thieves, right? So we needed something better. Unfortunately, the next evolution in identity online made it worse, called the federated model. And you've all seen this. You're going to establish a new online relationship with an e-commerce site you've never been to before. You are offered, do you want to create yet another account and password, or would you like to give more of your digital crumbs to one of these lovelies? Right? So again, they're all gathering their data because they're going to monetize it. So how do we get out of this mess? And it is verifiable credentials. So in a Web3 world, Every connection is peer-to-peer, and it happens on edge devices. There are no centralized data holds at all. Each side has equal power. You have to agree to connect to each other. You can keep that connection permanently if both sides decide to keep it. But either side at any time can go into their digital wallet and delete the connection, and it's gone forever. So that's where the term sovereignty comes in. So that's step one. How are you going to, in the future, establish connections is going to be decentralized. But the verifiable credential of an online connection is just one instantiation of a whole host of other verifiable credentials you're going to need to transact online and do it in a completely decentralized way. And the online connection is just one example of what we call the trust diamond for any verifiable credentialing ecosystem. So there's 4 roles. There are authorized issuers that make attestations about holders. There are verifiers that ask the holders for proof of those attestations. And then there's the governing authority that says the rules of who's allowed to issue, hold, and verify credentials in this ecosystem. Now, many of you still have physical wallets. Perfect examples. A credit card has a verifiable credentialing trust diamond. Your library card, your gym membership, your driver's license, your passport, all of this are just examples of trust diamonds. So how do you do it in a decentralized way? Well, everything's going to be on digital wallets, right? So we just showed you that first you have to have a connection, right? And the connection then allows you to transact in that trust diamond. So I don't know if you can see this, but I've got an example of one of these wallets. And the third one, the third picture, is actually where this holder has stored all of the connections. These are all the companies I'm in relationships with. The first picture is an issuer that is issuing an employee ID to this holder, and they have to first have a connection and say, would you like to download this credential into your wallet? And then the holder, in picture number 2, all of their verifiable credentials are now in digital form. The last one is a verifier. First, they have to have a connection, and then the verifier can ask for proof of a credential, right? And the holder now controls, okay, well, I'll let you see this and send it off with the digital wallet. So there's one question here. How does the verifier trust the credential, right? Well, enter a very lightweight use of blockchain technology called a decentralized public key infrastructure. So the verifier's wallet will get that credential proof from the holder, and it'll ping a distributed trust registry. We don't say the B word anymore. And the only thing on that distributed trust registry are the public keys from the issuers. And that way, the verifier can say only an authorized issuer could have created this credential. So it's a very lightweight use of blockchain technology. Okay, so this all sounds very theoretical. We've been doing adoption studies. So there are finally enterprise adoptions of verifiable credentials. They're all production pilots, meaning they're not scaled yet, but they can show you the way. So I was so glad this got published, Phil, before I got here. This got published last week in MIT Sloan Management Review. I also invite you to follow us on LinkedIn because there's lots of discussion going on this topic. And I thought, which case study? I don't have time to do a lot of them. I'm just going to do one of our case studies in this one. And I thought, since I'm here in the UK, I'm going to use the example of the National Health Service. I know you all want to hear an American accent tell you about your NHS service. But it's a great example because it's not a small organization. It operates in one of the most regulated types of industry. So if they're getting business and see business value out of it, I thought that might help you get over your skepticism. Okay, so here's the business problem that the NHS is trying to solve. The NHS operates as 1,200, we call them hospitals in America, I think you call them trusts. They're all independent. They all have their own HR systems and processes. The NHS, when they moved a doctor or a nurse or any healthcare professional around the system, every time they did that, the incoming hospital had to recertify all of their credentials, Where do you live? What's your background check? What's your medical degree? What training have you had? And on average, it took 2 days to onboard a doctor, right? And they do 1 million staff transfers a year. So that's 1 million. Think about the math and how you're not helping patients during this. So the NHS started a pilot in 2018, and it's one of the very few examples we have of one of these that was actually accelerated because of COVID. Because the NHS was thinking, we need more staff flexibility. We're going to have to be moving doctors all over the place to deal with the pandemic. So they actually did their rollout in the summer of 2020. So the last time I did interviews with our informants was in December of 2022. Out of the 1,200 hospitals, 100 hospitals have been onboarded, and the NHS does not publish how many of the doctors are actually using it. My estimate is based on small, maybe 1,000 to 2,000, but don't quote the NHS on that. That's my guess, not theirs. But they are doing an RFP to have a bigger rollout, and they're winning all kinds of innovation awards with this. But it all comes down to business value, right? And so going to the Trust Diamond, the NHS is the governing authority, and they love this because it went from onboarding a doctor on average 2 days down to a few minutes. All right, so that's a huge return. Their administrative costs have gone down, and they were able to, more agilely move staff around. Going up to the doctor, they love having everything digital in their wallet. They also like having control and sovereignty over it, and now they can see who is seeing their credentials. And the HR department said less administrative burden. So let's do a couple takeaways from here. They're doing a voluntary adoption, 1 doctor at a time, saying, you're about to be transferred. Would you rather go through 2 days of paperwork, or would you like to try this digital staff passport? So it's a slow rollout. They are relying on standards where they can. I'll talk standards in a second. They're still emerging, but they are using the W3C, verifiable credential standard. They're using a public blockchain network for their decentralized public key infrastructure. And the one they chose for the pilot is called the Sovereign Network. It costs $10 to post a public key, and you can create millions and millions of credentials from that one $10 investment. So that's why it's cheap. And the one lesson we said is don't mention the B word. So the B word being blockchain, right? When you're selling this to your diamond, don't say what's under the hood. That's not what's important. Focus on business value. So we do have a rocky road to interoperability on verifiable credentials. So on the slide with all the logos, those are all of the communities and standard-making bodies that are talking about either self-sovereign identity, digital credentials, verifiable credentials. And my pitch is going to be about the Trust Over IP Foundation. The Blockchain Center of Excellence was one of the first founders of this, and we launched in, about May of 2020. And why I liked it, one, it's managed by the Linux Foundation, which I find to be a very respectable organization. 2, I like their mission to have the meta framework, because we communicate and commune with all the other standard-making bodies. And the third reason why I loved it, it was the only time I'd ever been in a standards organization that gave equal weight to governance. So it's a dual stack. One side is the technology stack to make everything we just talked about interoperable, and the other one is the governance stack. So I thought that was kind of special. So I'll end here and just take you back to our beginning comments. So my life as a schizophrenic, I have found that our enterprises are using some of these building blocks. The first generation was about private permission blockchains, but the next generation better not be. So how are you going to get to Web3? And I hope that at least you now have an inkling that verifiable credentials are part of that. And I always like to end on a cartoon, because we've had lots of discussions today. And so we see here a boss and an employee. How should we operate in this environment? And the employee first says, play it safe, cut spending, pull back investment, no big moves, wait and see. And the CEO says, anything else? And he says, yes, we also have to completely reinvent how we do business. So back to your little thing you had this morning. Okay, ta-da. I'm almost at time. What do you want to do? Do you want me to do 1 or 2 questions? Okay. Does anyone have, or comments or criticisms, or? You can insult me. I'm going back over the pond tomorrow. Okay, we have one over here. Yes. Oh, I think you're going to get a mic.
Hi, my name is Michael.
Yeah.
Just a quick question on, for me as a consumer, right? So what does it factually mean? So could you explain what it actually means to me when I start using the credentials in this way?
It'll mean, this used to be called self-sovereign identity. And so you might be familiar with that. So it's the idea of all of your credentials now being of digital form. It's hard to believe that we are here in 2023, and most of the proofs that we have are still paper-based, right? So it's the idea is that you are going to be in control of your credentials, and you are going to be in control of the relationships you have. So getting rid of that idea of when you want to get rid of your relationship with Facebook, you can, because you are half of that relationship. So it's about empowerment, and that's hopefully where we're going to get to. They're going to want to give you a mic.
So fast forward to a world which is 100% Web3.
Okay.
And now we're hearing all about this generative AI.
Yep.
For AI to work, you need a corpus of data, but here data is owned by individuals. So how do you aggregate data in this world for AI to build upon and do the stuff it wants to do?
Well, that's a good question. But if people broadcast, if we think about social media, you'll still have data, data fields to do it. It's really about, who has control. I think that's a better way to say it, who has control. And the economic models are going to be completely different. I think that's, to me, one of the most exciting things. Connecting this to the AI, that's a whole nother conversation that I'd love to have with you. I will just say a couple things about ChatGPT as an academic. All over America, and I'm sure this is probably true in the UK, universities started to panic when they saw this. And I went to our campus because I knew it was going to be a bloodbath. And our people from the English department said the university must ban this, right? They went around the room. I'm afraid I can never give another essay. Where everyone came, and they finally came to me. I said, I have a huge fear, and my fear is that you will ban it. I said, this is a ridiculous notion to ban technology that's out there. And it's very easy to incorporate in the classroom. So I will ask ChatGPT a question, write 5 paragraphs comparing and contrasting Ripple and Stellar, show it to my students. They go to the blackboard. I say, and always ask it its resources. What resources did you use? And I say, okay, find sources that will either support or contest this, and then what other things can you compare and contrast? So you can use it as a tool and as a launching point. So I did what many, many people do in media training. I didn't answer your question. I answered the question I wished you had asked. Yes?
Question actually coming in online.
Okay.
How can we overcome data integration challenges and security and privacy concerns related to Web 3.0?
Okay, this is privacy enhancing. That's the whole point. There are no large data sets. Everything happens on edge devices. So people in this community are mostly excited about it because it is privacy enhancing. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I get my key. What happens when I lose it?
Oh, well, this is where some of you in here will jump in, because in the Trust Over IP Foundation, we do recognize that many people will want to rely on what we call agents. And then essentially, you can think of a cloud backup as your safety net would be one thing. I don't like that model because to me, you just ruined decentralization again. There are other things called social sharding, where you would take the keys that are associated with all of those, and I say, okay, you get a third of the key because I trust you. Leslie, I trust you. You get a third of the key, and you can recreate your wallet based on your own social network of trust.
I had a question. So as you know, Mary, we've been doing our own research into blockchain and decentralized ledger, and Web3 and all that. And one of the things that I've found is the user experience is very bad.
Oh, it is.
9 out of 10 people don't understand the technology because it's so hard to see. The user experience is really poor. And we've been talking to practically every large service provider, technology provider here, and it takes 5 people to demo something, right? and even after that, you don't really fully understand it. Have you seen anybody get over that hump? Because I don't think it will, no matter how great the technology and the potential is, unless you can get over the hump of explaining it simply, something that somebody with, who's not done a PhD in decentralized ledgers can understand it, we won't get over the hump of realizing its potential. Have you seen some progress on that?
A lot of hand-holding, right? Even going back to the NHS case, I think that's why they're doing it one at a time, because they haven't got that hockey stick of adoption yet. And the point that you made that I think is so powerful is because the user experience requires technical skills, most people end up destroying the value of decentralization by going centralized. So many of you in here might hold crypto. My guess is you don't manage it yourself with your own wallet like I do with my MetaMask wallet. You probably go through something like a Kraken or a Coinbase or another exchange. And most of the tragedies you hear about in this Web3 space have nothing to do with the Web3. It has to do with those centralized platforms. Think about FXX, Sam Bankman-Fried. It was just good old-fashioned fraud. It was a centralized exchange, took monies from customers and then put it in his own company. That's fraud. That has nothing to do with blockchain, has nothing to do with Web3. So many of the failures that you see in this space is when centralization comes right on top of decentralization and destroys the values, which again is about privacy and individual empowerment and control. Okay. Oh, okay. I just, you tell me when to cut. Okay, this is our last comment or question.
All right, great. Thank you, Mary. That was really a really interesting talk. You talked about people and the relationship with companies and how we sort privacy and where the spoils go. Any thoughts on governments and citizens and what this might mean?
Yes. One of our case studies is on the province of British Columbia. Because I think one of the first credentials you need besides the connection is what your citizenship is. So if governments would lead with this and at least get a digital driver's license, for example, that you can trust, because right now governments, when they say they're doing stuff online, you're taking photographs and sending it as an email attachment. So there are some forward-looking governments that say, how can we do the credentials? Now, what I think was brilliant about the province of British Columbia is they started with the credentials for the business ecosystem, like registrations and licenses, because that was in the public domain. They didn't have to worry about personally identifiable information. And then the next ecosystem they did this for was lawyers, right? So you get your degree from the one ministry and then trying to get into courts, which was the verifier. So they're doing it as a rational, slow rollout. But hopefully, when you have some very visible early successes, then that will hopefully help speed up adoption. So anyway, go VC, go verifiable credentials. Hope to see you all in Web3.